I'm Karen Anderson. I'm the Programme Development Manager here at WUN. And around the room are lots of amazing advocates and board members that support the network and help us to provide all the amazing things that we do for our members and our partners. So WUN was founded back in 2018 by a group of women who realised that there was definitely a gap, and there was a real evidence of a lack of women within the utilities sector, especially in the senior space. And over a glass of wine, they decided they would like to do something about it. So it was founded back, like I said, in 2018, and it's gone from strength to strength since then. We've now got over 8,000 members and followers, which is amazing. We put on all sorts of events, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a second. And we are really lucky to have partners from across the industry that support us and enable us to do the amazing work that we do. So massive thank you to all of those partners. And if your name's not up there, then please feel free to get in contact and we can discuss how we could work together. So just a few things. This is obviously our first face-to-face event for 2025, and it's really nice to be in Birmingham. So a lot of our events are in the southeast in London, so it's great to have you here and coming along to support us. And this is something we hope to do more of over the next year and get out and about across all different regions. On our website, you'll find all the events that we've got on. There's lots coming up this year. There's lots of details on there around the I Am Remarkable, which is something we're really proud to support. We've got an event in early March in London. And really excitingly, we've got our second award ceremony, Women in Utilities Awards, which is in June. Nominations are open now, so feel free to have a look at that on our website, find out more, come along, get nominating. It was an amazing, our first event last year was an amazing event, so really looking forward to that again this year. Right now we've got our annual survey open, where this year we're building on the success of last year's survey around unconscious bias, and this year we're looking at culture and how the culture within the utilities sector is shaping up. So please go onto our website, get the link there for the survey, and we'd be really grateful to hear your opinions. On our website, there's loads and loads of resources for you to use. We're really proud of the podcasts. We've got, I think, in excess of 60 podcasts now, which are often hosted by our amazing advocates. There's 2 right now that have just been done very recently. One of our first video podcasts around the water industry, which is very much related to what we're discussing today. And there's another podcast there, again, a water industry, but by one of our advocates, which is interviewing one of our award winners from last year. So again, use those, and they're a really good resource. We've also really got an amazing mentor platform. We're really lucky to be able to provide that for free to our members. So if you would like to find yourself a mentor, or you would like to give something back and become a mentor, then again, encourage you to have a look at that on our website. There's some amazing feedback on there as well. And Julia on the screen there, one of our advocates, I'm sure would be very happy to talk to you about that platform if you want to speak to her later this evening. And finally, we're really proud of our development framework that we've released recently. Our first cohort of One Drive, which is a development programme aimed at those in their first line leadership, was launched at the end of last year, and we're now booking up for our third cohort. And our first cohort of One Thrive, which is again a development programme, but this one is aimed at women looking for or in senior leadership positions. And our first cohort for that is going starting at the end of March. So really exciting. Last words, really, have a really good night. Thank you once again for coming and supporting us this evening. We're really grateful to you. And if you're not already, please go on our website, please join, and have a look at all the amazing things we've got on offer. I'm going to hand over to Kat Ibbotson from WSP, who is going to introduce the event this evening, and then the panel will follow. But thank you once again for coming this evening.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Kat Ibbotson. I'm a director here at WSP and I sit in transformation and digital advisory. My background is actually I was in public sector for 18 years in the Environment Agency before moving over to WSP. So mainly a flood and coastal management background. And within WSP, I also manage the Environment Agency key client account. So my background has been very much in decarbonisation and actually taking organisations through that, but also the people and the organisation change that needs to go with the technical solution. So in terms of net zero in the water sector, for me, it's always about balance. It's about balance in terms of decarbonisation, removing carbon from the atmosphere in terms of actually what we're emitting in and actually what the planet can absorb. But it's also about balance in terms of looking at it from a systems, a network and an asset level. So what we know is we do have within the water sector net zero roadmaps that have been published in 2020, and we have commitments in terms of operational emissions up to 2030 in terms of public interest commitment. We have Ofwat that has put specific performance commitments in place. We also have different organisations that have their own specific decarbonisation plans in terms of Severn Trent Water, South West Water and United Utilities. But we also have organisations such as the Environment Agency who have their own commitments in terms of 90% reduction up to in carbon up to by 2045 to 2050 in line with SBTI. So each organisation, each sector is almost doing their own thing. So yes, they've got their plans from an organisation, from an asset perspective, but actually what are we missing beyond that? What we also find is that there is a big difference in terms of maturity. Some organisations may be great in terms of actually looking at their operational emissions, but actually really poor at looking at their embodied capital carbon. So you have organisations such as Anglia Water and Scottish Water who have got more oversight and transparency in terms of what they're emitting. But that inconsistency creates more problems. Because effectively what we have is we have more challenges. We have more challenges in terms of being able to focus and prioritise on decarbonisation, making sure that we have every opportunity, early thinking from a strategic right down to an asset level in terms of being able to reduce carbon through innovative ways of working, digital, in terms of ensuring it's just actually on the agenda in some cases. But ultimately, we also have the challenge in terms of increasing programmes of work. So obviously the difference between AMP7, 55 million up to AMP8, 140 billion, sorry, the million. And then the differences in terms of the Environment Agency, previously 2.6 billion up to 5.2, and that's going to be increasing from 2026 onwards. That has a carbon impact, in terms of the investment that we need to effectively improve our ageing infrastructure and actually respond to demand. So this has a capital carbon, embodied carbon challenge, but also a whole life and operationals challenge. The other part of it is we also have a challenge in terms of a changing climate. So what we maybe have done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, may not be the right solution. So we need to be thinking more broadly. So effectively what that has is the solution of changing rainfall annual is extreme events in terms of flooding and actually droughts. So we have to pump more. So it has a bigger impact in terms of our operational and therefore our carbon again. It's also water usage. So we have abstractions, we have more communities being built. Again, it has an impact in terms of the infrastructure that we have to put in place. But ultimately, we need to be adaptable. And we have to challenge whether our plans are adaptable for the future. Are they adaptable for the next 5 years, next 10 years, or actually do we need to be thinking more strategically in terms of how we work collectively from an integrated perspective? So really, as a wider water industry, we need to be thinking, can we do this alone? Well, no, we can't. Net zero is not done by an individual, it's not done by an organisation, it's not done by a sector, it's done by everybody working together. And we have to get into this mindset that it's not a competition, it's a collaboration, and we have to have integrated solutions moving forward. Because when we look in terms of those competing demands, it's really about, in the water sector, we've got our own priorities, but actually so does the energy sector, so does the agricultural sector. We have competing demands in terms of other industries and what they need from a water resources users perspective. And this could lead to lots of different challenges in terms of resource depletion, environmental issues, creating conflict We know not, in the UK we have challenges, but actually globally this creates challenges. We have displaced people. We have actually conflict from a country-on-country perspective because not enough water is available or too much water is available, and actually it displaces people. So there needs to be a collective focus on the things that we already have at our gift. We already have innovative solutions. We already have many of the things that we can put in place, but we need to prioritise this. And actually a lot of our funding doesn't actually support decarbonisation measures because it has to be cost effective. So again, we have these challenges in terms of how we take these things forward. And that's why strong policy is really important, but collaborative policy that works across sectors, not just from utilities to a local authority to an environment agency perspective, but actually to an energy industry, to a residential development perspective. They all have to be working in tandem to get the right result. Because when we look at it from an energy perspective, we have lots of net zero solutions that are coming in to address our increasing energy usage, our growing population, our demands from new businesses. And these are great because obviously it's mitigating other energy uses elsewhere and obviously carbon emissions to do with fossil fuels, but they also have a water demand. They have a water demand in terms of where they're going to be placed. Are they in the right location? These are things that perhaps we are not thinking about more holistically because we're thinking about, okay, we want the solution in our own sectors, when really it has a knock-on effect for the water sector within the UK. And this is a real problem because it means actually we have to respond to that, which means we maybe need more infrastructure. We need more pumping from an operational perspective. We need to build more water treatment plants. We need to be thinking about flood risk management. These all have an impact. So it's really through the creation of new technology and services that we need to be thinking about how these things work from a system of systems perspective. So we have our own water systems, we have our own approaches, but how does that sit in the bigger picture? And this is where the water industry, for me, needs to do more and needs to be more challenging of what happens elsewhere and more demanding. And it's also about thinking at a systems, network, and asset level. So if you haven't heard that phrase before, it comes from past 2080. The new version from 2023, which looks at buildings and infrastructure. And it really does provide a backbone in terms of how to manage carbon at an organisation and project level. But it's also a facilitator for many other things. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend looking it up. So what is the solution? For me, it's about integrated water management. It's about how these things work together. It's about looking not just about a utility sector, a flood risk management sector, a local authority sector in terms of surface water. It's about how these things work collectively and then broaden that. How does it look in terms of from a social perspective, from a residential, from new businesses, from an energy changing and transition perspective? Because we have to look at it from a cause and effect. Because if you look at a lot of things that we have to have in place, it's because there's something there which means we have to respond to it. But how often do we challenge whether we can remove that obstacle so we don't need to do some works? Is that housing community in the right place? Is that pumping station in the right place? What is it actually? Is it historic? Do we have to put it, can we take it out? Because actually that's our biggest carbon emitter. So having an integrated approach really is about thinking more broadly. It's about looking at it from not just your own organisation, your own service. It's about challenging what perhaps we've done before. Yes, we need our own plans. Yes, we need to be prioritising it. It's not to say we do away with those, but we need to be thinking more holistic and more broad because our problems are becoming more vast. Our climate is changing. And actually, if we don't think in a layered approach, we'll come out with unintended consequences. And that's what we're starting to see. You may have seen in lots of different diagrams that this sort of siloed approach in terms of the carbon vision. And that's because sometimes when we promote decarbonisation, we cause other problems elsewhere. And that shouldn't be the case. It should be a facilitator. It should be a facilitator for promoting other things around it and getting the right solution. And for me, that's what we need to be better about, because there's no one right or wrong decision to make. It's about what is the right decision at that point in time, and can we justify it and make it transparent and understand why we made those decisions with the bigger picture in mind. And as I say, it's about balance. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, so my name's Karma Loveday. I'm the editor of a specialist water sector magazine called the UK Water Report. Delighted to be here chairing the panel today. I think, Katherine, you've done a brilliant job there of setting us up for this, and it's a great topic and a really interesting time, I think, to be talking about net zero. If you think about global developments since the American election, I think that kind of net zero agenda is under pressure. Here, our government is really focused on growth, seemingly ahead of everything else. And in water, there is just so much going on. I'm sure anyone from water here will know that actually net zero, while it's massive, it's only really one thing that the water companies have to think about. So a really complicated landscape. What we're going to do today, we've got about an hour for the panel. We're going to divide it into two halves to try and keep us focused so we don't drift off. And we've got a topic for each half. So first of all, we're going to be talking about how can the water industry achieve net zero? So that's about decarbonising water and where we are, whether we're on track with that. And then in the second half, at about 7 o'clock, I'll move us on to the second half. And we're going to be talking there about what the impacts are on water availability of achieving net zero as a country. So we're sort of turning things on its head there and looking at the extent to which decarbonisation plans consider and provide for water security. So we'd love you to get involved. There will be 2 separate slots for questions. So we'll take questions at the end of the first part and then again questions at the end of the second part. If you can try to put your question in the sort of rightish section, that would be helpful, but don't worry too much about it. I'm sure the panel can cope with whatever you want to throw at them. Okay, and the only other thing to say by way of introduction is that everyone here today is speaking as an individual. They're not speaking as a representative of their organisation. So I'll just briefly go along the line, and Kat's already introduced herself, so I'll let you off this one. But if we can start with you, Sarah, and then just a very brief introduction.
So I'm Sarah McMath, CEO of MOSL, which is the market operator for business water customers in England. And I'm also a board member at the Women in Utilities Network.
I'm Liz Burlon. I'm a senior manager in our resources and sustainability practice at Accenture.
Hi, I'm Erin Zhang. I'm head of commercial for the UK at Al Utilities.
Brilliant. That was lovely and brief. Thank you very much. Right. So I'll dive straight in with the first part. So how can the water industry achieve net zero? So let's start with the basics. I mean, Kat, you mentioned the net zero roadmap. And I have to say, I think net zero is one of the things that the water industry, the water sector, has actually been on the front foot with. To some degree, they've been very sort of proactive. If you think back to 2020, when the commitment that you mentioned was made, you know, it was quite unusual for a whole sector to have collaborated and come to that commitment together. And we have a roadmap resulting from that. But actually, the world's changed, hasn't it, since then? So I think, you know, priorities have shifted with the kind of focus on water quality and the environmental agenda. There have been, the need to create lots more carbon-intensive storm storage tanks, higher treatment standards, massive investment program, plus the final determinations have really matched funding to the 2050 national target rather than the 2030 industry target. So we've got a little bit of a mismatch. So it'd be interesting to just start with where we are on this. So does the water industry currently have a clear roadmap to achieving net zero? And are the targets we've got achievable? So we'll start with you, Sarah, please.
I'm probably going to start that with being quite controversial and maybe challenge one of the statements that was made. I don't think we do have a clear plan. I think we've got water companies who have plans that have been built within a relatively siloed part of their own teams. So even within a water company, I don't believe that net zero is that there are net zero plans which are deliverable across all of their operations. And infrastructure investment commitments. So I would argue at this point, a lot of the plans are playing lip service to it. And I think they are sometimes quite regularly dropped at the point at which other regulatory targets come in. And then again, maybe to put in a more controversial point, I think there is also a danger that a lot of our challenges in the water sector, particularly when it comes to environmental challenges, are more led by the media and politics than they are by the genuine needs of customers and the environment. And I think particularly so in this area. I think there are areas of the final determinations and companies' plans. Great news that 6 are going to the CMA. I think it's going to be very interesting times in the sector. But there are definitely elements of water companies' plans where they have had to make commitments around environmental pollutions, which if you look at it through a net zero landscape, is just dumb. It's just spending lots of carbon for a very small amount of environmental benefit.
Yes, so I think you're quite right there. And kind of early positives have sort of been derailed by real life. Kat, is there anything else you'd like to say on that, or do you feel that you've?
I think, I don't know who said it, but a plan is a plan is a plan, and plans change, and it's about practical action. So the fact that WaterAid's got a plan from 2020, great. Where are we seeing that difference? So what we should be seeing is that there is a shift in trend. There's a shift in trend in terms of the types of things that we're doing, that we're implementing, and actually every project that goes forward is having a reduction. We're not necessarily seeing that. What we see is the same things being repeated, a traditional approach. Now, that's great. That's the only solution. But actually, there's more solutions out there if we take a more less risk-averse, should say, approach in terms of actually what we can put forward. And I would say, for me, we're not seeing it done quickly enough. So yes, you'll have investment plans, you'll have net zero plans, you'll have all these different things, but a plan is nothing if you don't actually enact it. And I think that's the overall issue, is if we don't put it in place and we don't start seeing the differences, then we can't learn for the next project.
Absolutely. I won't ask everyone every question, but for this first one, I will let everyone have their say. So Liz, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah that I think that the commitments were there and the roadmap maybe was done by a sustainability strategy team within each of the water companies. And then when you go to actually implement it, it's quite difficult. So, in my role, I've had conversations with water companies about okay, how are you going to electrify your fleet? Oh, just as it turns over, maybe we'll turn it to electric, but maybe not this type of vehicle because they have to go too far and we're not sure about charging. And, but you could solve that. Oh, but then we'd have to do this and then we'd have to get this team involved and it would be too hard. Okay, well, how about energy efficiency? Oh, yeah, we're really interested in energy efficiency. How much of your water production fleet is sub-metered? Part of one water treatment works. And it's okay, cool. Because it's just so many different teams that have to be involved and they're so used to working in silos. And net zero is something that involves every part of the supply chain and every part of different teams. From energy procurement team is often going to be a different team, not even talking to the building management team. But those two teams need to work together when it comes to something like energy efficiency. And the progress has been uneven across the sector, right? So you see Severn Trent's done a lot with energy efficiency. Maybe Anglian Water's done a bit more with embodied carbon. But I also don't think they were learning from each other and working together. And that's something that the sector can get better at across lots of different topics. But net zero is definitely one where they could do a lot more collaboration and learn from each other and maybe make some more strides towards circular economy, particularly with all of the infrastructure investment that we're going to see in this next AMP.
So I see a theme emerging, silos. Erin?
I guess I'll come from a slightly different perspective, partly. So my day-to-day role interacts with a lot of innovators out there and solutions for, net zero. And solutions are out there. Like we ran a session last year that Sarah was at about looking at, what would utopia be for the sector? And a lot of parts of the world, they have solutions and they've tested them, but for some reason they're not adopted here, or there might be new ones, but they're too risky, to take a gamble on. But we have to embrace innovation if we're going to, achieve the goals for net zero. And there's a lot of frustration with suppliers and with these innovators of some of them, sign up to agreements with water companies, and then they can't continue as a business because the process is just so long and drawn out and bureaucratic. And, I think, net zero and like innovation are so inextricably linked. But if the cultures within, and I saw one has, a focus on that cultural piece, it's also around if we can't embrace, innovation and innovative thinking and strip it back really to the fundamentals of as human beings, what are the challenges we have to overcome? It gets so bogged down with regulations and, that I think we need to strip it back and be a bit of activists in the sector and say, this is silly. All these processes are silly. Why is it this way? Can't we just come with a fresh energy and perspective? Because I think the people at the top of the sector and who are leading these companies, at the end of the day, they want to solve fairly basic problems that become very complex, as you said, as you get in the silos and down the chain. So I think, we need to somehow make the messages clearer and highlight where the issues are so that we can actually, in some cases, embrace innovation, which I think if we can do it in certain areas, we can learn and hopefully.
I'll come back to innovation because some of the other panelists may have views also on that. But just sticking with plans for the moment, obviously we had the final determinations in December. Sarah just mentioned today's the day for the referral, so it's been very exciting.
Very sad. We're very excited.
We are, very sad. But fun, it's a lot of money, isn't it? Whatever it ends up being, it's over £100 billion. I mean, do you think that the net zero agenda has been done justice within that investment package? Is the spend focused in the right areas? Does anyone want to hazard a view on that?
I mean, I can give a view. I think the answer to that would have to be no, because I pick up something that Kat said. I don't think we've looked at it as a system. So I was reflecting earlier with the ladies who've joined us from WaterAid. When I went out to Malawi in 2018 to visit a WaterAid project there. And we were designing a system to meet the needs of a community who wanted 50 litres of water per person per day. And this was seen as absolutely beyond their wildest dreams in terms of what we could provide. In this country, we are looking at around 145 litres per person per day. And that isn't considered to be part of the net zero conversation. But of course it is, because if everybody just used less water, we would use less energy, we would lose less infrastructure. So for me, it becomes a plan that is stuck on top of, rather than actually how do we think about the system as a whole and focus on that being, I'm never quite sure what a circular economy is, so maybe you can tell me, but I get the concept of actually looking at it as a whole system and saying actually we will meet the goals quicker if we all just use less and we think about using the right water at the right time. So I don't think it's joined up enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
I think they've stumbled into a bit of net zero through what you said, because there is a big focus on water resilience and per capita consumption reduction. Mm-hmm. So there is big smart metering programs that were being rolled out. I mean, obviously Thames did it 10 years ago, but everyone else is kind of catching up and going through a big smart metering revolution through the per capita consumption reduction, which for them, they're saying this is a water resilience thing, but it is also going to, in the end, save energy. So they've kind of backdoored into it through water resilience and energy and per capita consumption reduction, but it's not explicit.
Yeah. Which is a shame, isn't it, given it's such a massive problem. Okay, so I promised I'd come back to innovation. Erin raised, I will. I mean, you would imagine that innovation would have to play a key role in decarbonising water. There are some things that we just fundamentally don't know how to do at the moment. I'm thinking of sort of wastewater process emissions, for example, and lots of other things. I mean, how's the sector doing in terms of net zero innovation? Anyone...
I don't want to offend anyone. I think there's a lot of great people with good intention in the sector. And I think it's a shame that, the sector often gets bad press from the public because certain things get public attention, and it's like, why is the water industry not doing more? Like, and they've got all this money and, and profits and whatnot. So I get all that. Like, I get the perspective of there's a lot of good people who are trying really hard, but there are just fundamentals about structures that it's really hard to make a difference. And the people that do, I speak to people who, have been working their whole careers around per capita consumption reduction, and they're tired, like they've been having, this isn't a new conversation. They've been having it a long time.
Yeah.
But to actually make change is really difficult as an individual. And yeah, it's I don't think that the water companies are doing enough. There's issues at a practical level of, you might identify something as good and it works, but how do you actually adopt that at scale? How do we share among the water industry, what works and what doesn't? And also, like, how do we learn from other sectors and work with other sectors? A lot of the water industry's issues are connected to agriculture, for example, but I'm not sure that joined up thinking is happening in the way that it needs to, but it's a lot to put just on the water industry to solve.
Yeah.
It's a bigger, wider conversation, but there may be others from water companies who can give their opinion later and as well.
Did you want to come?
Yeah, I think the last question in this one, there's an element of behaviour change. So innovation is hard to do in the UK. It takes 40 years to get something really good out because we think of the long term and it has to be perfect. Think of the tech industry. You change your phone every year, every 2 years. It's got new buttons on it. It's got new things. It's constant, it's evolutionary. When we think of infrastructure assets, we're thinking, it's going to be designed for the next 80, 100, 120 years. We don't think about how can we have this asset where we can take elements out and update it little and often that facilitates good, innovative products, but also allows that sort of cultural change in terms of that usage and how we operate assets in a different way. We've also got the challenge in terms of, because we're aiming for perfection and this long-term sort of ambition, what we're missing out on is how do we influence individuals to change what they're doing when we give them everything? We don't set any boundaries around that. It's almost, we're going to give you a nice big defence that's going to protect you from everything, and we're going to give you the best water, and you can have as much as you possibly want. And if you're unlucky, you might have a meter, but most of us don't, and therefore you're just going to get a little bill. That's not influencing enough. It's about how do you reduce the operation and what people have access to, which will have a tipping point. So you can do that in a very soft way, or you can say, well, actually, it's simply not available. And that's a very hard sort of position to be in when you have customers at the end of the day and things that you have to meet. And it's very challenging, I think, for the water sector to be in that position. So they go for perfect. And I think the two things are intrinsically linked in terms of we are stifling innovation and new technology because we're aiming for that long term. We don't want to upset anything. I don't want it to be great. When really it should be little and often, it should be about continued improvement. It should be about swapping things out, thinking of the whole life, and not thinking that you have to have everything to its nth degree. You should have that little and often approach that a project is an intervention to improve.
Thank you. Really good points.
I'm just going to add in two examples to show that it's not just that innovation isn't just about technology. So I would agree that all of the technical innovation that we need in order to meet our net zero ambitions are already being used in other parts of the world and in some cases in this country. So just one challenge around are we innovative enough in how we regulate and how we manage the economics? So I'll give you two live examples. One is a water company in the north of England that has got a very large industrial development, literally about as far as those doors, away from their largest wastewater treatment works. That industrial site is using 22 megalitres of water, which is a lot of water, and it's using all of that water for cooling purposes. The really bleeding obvious thing to do is to take the treated wastewater effluent, treating it to standards which are common across the world, and moving it across the road and using it for cooling purposes. The reality of the regulatory framework means that the logical thing for the investors and the board is to upgrade the water treatment works, which is 7 miles away, build a new 7-mile long water pipe, use clean water to spray the outside of metal tanks, put all of that waste into a combined sewer that is already overloaded and is already polluting the local watercourse, and then upgrade the wastewater treatment works for the about 18 megalitres a day that needs to go back in order to be treated. And one of the reasons why there's all those economic drivers, but there's a really basic issue. There is no tariff for charging for treated effluent. So we have these ridiculous situations where we make really bad decisions for the environment for really silly, tiny reasons. And then just to give you another example, again, a live example of another water company who's got a very large battery installation. Again, they don't need treated water, but they need a lot of it. And they're saying to the CEO of that water company, I'm happy to pay you 10 times what anyone else pays. I just need lots of water because I need to grow my business. And because we have a regulatory framework that says the costs have to be, the prices have to be cost reflective, they can't charge more for that water, even though you could potentially use that money to then put in more environmental solutions. So it's innovation is also, I mean, I guess most critically, it's just about thinking differently and looking at the problem differently.
Yeah, it was almost, you couldn't make some of that up, really, could you?
I didn't, just saying.
Just hold on a second. You've raised the regulatory framework, which obviously I wanted to come to. You've obviously given some really good examples there of what you'd like to see change. I just wanted to open that up to everyone else. I don't know if that's what you wanted to say, but please wrap that in. Say what you were going to say, but then wrap in what would you like to see in terms of regulatory barrier removal for decarbonising water?
Yeah, so it's good to bring the two things together, that sort of like different types of incentives and the technology landscape. I think that, I mean, having worked in technology and water companies for more years than I care to admit, the tech debt is real with water companies. Like, we've gotten into the architecture of one water company. We found Lotus Notes in there as an integration point. And we're like, this is an old mail system. Shouldn't be in your integration architecture. So the tech debt is real, and that does make it really difficult to scale technology at scale. But that being said, it's at a turning point now where the water companies are really working hard to clear their technology debt, and also where the incentives are right from the regulatory framework, innovation finds a way. So with leakage, right? Leakage was such a big focus for so many years, and some really innovative things have actually found their way to scale with leakage. So Microsoft's Fido solution in the London area with Thames Water has been a great innovation, and that's found its way despite Thames Water's architectural debt. So those things do find their way when the right regulatory incentives are in place and the right financial incentives are in place, and they just aren't there for net zero. I think that's a great insight, Sarah, around the changing of the tariff so that we can use water in a more circular way. So Singapore, for example, obviously is an island nation, doesn't really have any of their own freshwater, their freshwater sources. So they import most of their water from Malaysia, but in 2060, that is ending. So they have to have entirely closed circuit of water by then. They already produce something like 20 or 40% of their water is new water, which is just effluent that's been retreated to potable quality. That wouldn't be possible in the UK, right? You have to discharge it to the environment and then re-abstract it. So allowing change and almost financial incentives for these kind of circular water solutions, or putting financial incentives in place around net zero in the same way that we have around leakage, per capita consumption reduction, cost to serve, customer service. I'd love to see, CMEX for net zero.
Mm-hmm. Good idea. Okay, I'll ask one more question and then we'll come to the floor. So be ready if you've got questions. So I just wanted to touch on growth. Obviously, that is the government's primary mission at the moment. Government says it's compatible with net zero, but obviously people raise eyebrows when there's things like a new runway at Heathrow. How is that compatible? I just, would like your sense of, whether you feel the net zero agenda might be diluted for growth, or whether both of those things are actually compatible and whether there's enough focus on sustainable growth.
I'll give a very brief answer. I think only if you look at it at a country level and not as a water company level. as it currently stands today, some of the most water intensive industries, like data centres, are concentrated in growing in parts of the country where we literally have no water. So unless we think about it at a nation level, I was asked at a conference like this about 6 months ago, and somebody said, what advice would you give to somebody wanting to build a data centre in Cambridge? I was like, well, don't build it in Newcastle. Why on earth would you build a data centre which uses huge quantities of water in the part of the country where there is no water? So you have to look at the country, and then potentially you can balance economic growth with net zero, but you can't do it if you do it at a company level.
No. So we're having lots of silos, aren't we? All different types of silos that need to be torn down. Anyone else on growth before we go to the floor?
I would agree. I think there's a fundamental problem in terms of how we focus on growth on the individual sector, and we don't fund collaboratively. We fund that sector, that organisation, and that leads to unintended consequences because there's no driver to have to work together to get the right solution. And also the challenge then about whether you build new businesses, new homes in places that are flooding or actually are, struggle in terms of water, doesn't come up in the agenda high enough for actually to stop that happening.
Yeah. Okay. We'll return to this, I think, in part 2. But for now, let's see if anyone has any questions. We've got a microphone. Lovely. Thank you. If you just say who you are as well, please, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel from BFY Group. I just had a question based on a couple of things that I've heard. So touching on the kind of per capita reduction opportunity, touching on some of the innovation opportunities in terms of treatment, changes to treatment rules and regulations. How much is the water industry's relationship with its customers being seen as an enabler to net zero? And does something need to be different there?
Would you like anyone particular to answer? Or
anyone?
I mean, I'll give a view on that. I think absolutely. But again, I guess going back to my example in Malawi, where people know that they live in a water scarce country and they've come from a position of having very basic sanitary provisions and clean, safe drinking water, that relationship with water is at the heart of people's usage. We simply don't have that here. The vast majority of people have no concept of a link between basic sanitation, public health, use of water, climate change. And I think unless you change that, then we can do all we like on per capita consumption, we can smart meter people, but if people don't see that relationship, I mean, if you look at it, one of the things that you get a lot in the water industry is saying we need to look to energy. And that's interesting. Apart from most of us in this room would have the same relationship with energy. So if any of you have got small children, your kids very early on know that dad or mum is going to get really angry if they leave everything, or is it just my husband? That relationship with energy and climate change, from a very young age that actually there is a link between turning the lights off and saving the planet. There is that same link with usage of water that just the vast majority of people don't get. So I think unless you get that basic connection and accept that you have to therefore pay for it and it's not free, it doesn't just drop out the sky. I think that is I don't have an answer on how we solve it, but that is at the heart of how we need to move forward.
I also think that the trust in water companies is pretty low. So they're maybe not the best of an influencer behavior because, use less water. It's like you use less water, right? Like your leakage is all over the place, and also you're just putting sewage into our rivers. Why should we talk? Why should we listen to you? Kind of like average consumer on the street. So we need to think about who are other water stewards who are actual influencers of behavior, who people will look to. And along with a colleague of mine who I work with, Crazy Ideas, football clubs, because they actually manage the same amount of water as smallholder farmers. Between all of the different pitches they manage. It's not just the game day pitch, it's all the training pitches, right? So they're actually quite big users of water, and they are influencers of behavior. So if Arsenal says use less water, people in North London might use less water. So what are some partnerships that the water industry can have that could sponsor and help to increase that awareness without them being the face of it?
Okay. Other questions? Lovely, thank you.
We were talking about AI before we came in and kind of thinking about, well, I would relate it to what you were saying before around like subconscious use of water. And I think people are just now, like, I'm definitely noticing conversations with friends, people saying, oh my gosh, do you know how much water is used each time you search something on ChatGPT? So I just wondered, like, whether conversations around, I know in the presentation at the start, you kind of mentioned around actually water, like security for like industrial use, and you kind of tied that into actually reducing per capita consumption. But I suppose in that scenario, we're kind of trying to reduce the per capita consumption to then feed the water use directly into something else. So it's not necessarily actually reducing, I suppose, the overall energy. But yeah, I just suppose I wondered if you'd had any thoughts around like that AI and whether that is feeding into the conversations.
I have lots of thoughts around it. Accenture, hello. So we, I do quite a bit of work with water companies and water infrastructure companies about how they can use AI and Gen AI to improve their operations and become more efficient. But at the same time, always give them the health warning of like, it also does use lots of water, right? And I think there is, it's not solved. And we have to be conscious of how we use AI as a large user of electricity, as a large user of water, as a large secondary user of water, because depending on where you're getting that electricity from, it could be up to 40 liters per megawatt hour that you're actually using, or thousands of liters per megawatt hour if it's coal-fired. But at the same time, we also need to think about, to Sarah's point earlier, the data centers. And where do we site the data centers? So if we have to put them somewhere that is water scarce, can there be a secondary use for the warmed water? So Telefonica, for example, installed big data centers in Spain, which is not famous for being rich in water, apart from when they have flooding events. And they worked with a local business center where they said, we'll heat up the water, cooling our data center, and you use it for your building heating. So in that way, there was a secondary use of it, and they were able to then save on carbon because they didn't use whatever they were using before, oil or gas or electricity, to heat their office building. So you can co-locate data centers with secondary users of the warm water, like a swimming pool or a hospital or an office building or a residential building. So what's a way that we can kind of build that infrastructure to have an overall system that is net zero, even if you still need to use it. But at the same time, also just be conscious of using it because of the amount of water and energy you're using.
Erin?
So I guess just having worked at a water company before and work alongside water companies now, their ability to adopt, or install the latest software or be able to get through a firewall to access a webinar, or certain emails to get through, ability to adopt the latest, and AI as an example. And there are a lot of innovative AI solutions. But a lot of companies are like, don't really know where to start with that. They've got enough problems as it is that they kind of do know the answers to, but they just need to do it. And with this AMP, they've got more money than ever to build more than ever and to deliver more than ever. Have they got the capacity to do that? And I just think there's something around if, water is a finite resource. We are running out of fresh water, and for me, I'm sometimes dumbfounded by, it's in our lifetime that we're going to run out of fresh water to drink if we continue acting. And I'm talking like 10 to, not to scare people aware of this, but, within the next decade, this is an urgent thing. And imagine if the brightest minds in tech, really understood that. And for not only their children, we used to talk about our children's children are going to be impacted by sustainability issues. No, it's like you and your children are going to be impacted. So let's solve this. I just think water needs to be at the center of these conversations. It shouldn't be the water industry thinking about just net zero on their own. Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the water industry, is it?
It's about human society, and us continuing. And it's linked to us valuing water for the precious resource it is. It's key to everything. And like having WaterAid here, it's, that's the crux of it, isn't it? And some countries are already at day zero. They've run out. And go for days, like South Africa, going for 5 days without water, it's happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sarah.
I just wanted to say I was really impressed by your friends, because I found out about the use of water when my youngest child, who's doing music at university, wrote an essay on the ethics of using AI as a musician. And interestingly, the single biggest ethical point that came out of their dissertation was the use of natural resources. And I'm in the water industry, and I found out about that over Christmas from my child. So you obviously have some very right-on environmental friends, because I don't think the majority of people do understand. And actually, we've got a colleague in MOSL who's probably a similar age to you. And she said, actually, I do think about it. If I think about using AI, I will use it if it's going to be for good usage, but I won't use it for something silly, because I know that that's a lot of natural resources. So I think that I was really surprised that you've got friends who do that, but actually it isn't, going back to your point, it isn't well known by customers or humans that this is a real issue.
No, I think it's creeping in a little bit, isn't it? I have seen a couple of pieces on the BBC about it and so on. So maybe it's coming. Yeah. Maybe it's coming. Okay, and we're at 7:00. I will pause there. If you've got more questions, you can wrap them into the next question session. Don't worry about partitioning them too much. Okay, so let's move on to part 2, which was kind of flipping things on the head a bit and looking at the impacts on water availability of achieving net zero as a country. Obviously, we have the 2050 target. It's a really important national ambition. It's going to require systemic change as well as cultural and popular behavioural change, as we've mentioned. So I just want to sort of dig into a few of the kind of water elements of that, starting with some of the kind of clean energy technologies. So, the obvious examples are hydrogen, new nuclear, very water intensive. I mean, I'm in the water sector. It seems to me that when those things are planned, the water usage isn't really factored in up front. I don't know if that's your feeling as well, but, what's the impact if we don't plan together and work together? What does that mean for both water availability and net zero? And what can be done about it, I suppose, more importantly?
I'll just add something to your point, which probably, I guess, gives us a scale of some of the challenges here, and we'll get back to planning. So I met recently with the Director General of DESNZ, and we had a really interesting conversation. He said, my job is net zero for natural resources. And I'll ask, of course, so you look at water. Yeah, absolutely look at water. Wasn't expecting that. I was expecting that was DEFRA. However, as the conversation went on, what became apparent is what he was talking about for water was water with heat in it to be used for district heating. So he saw water purely as a vehicle for heat. And when I said, well, what about where that water comes from? I just got completely blank looks. So I was like, never thought of that. And so that is a group of people who are at the centre of our government who are planning natural resources to meet net zero and looking at those technologies. And water is just simply not, water is simply a vehicle to move heat.
So what can we do about that? I mean, those are informed, intelligent people. They should have it on their radar. How can we change this?
I think that's going back to my point earlier on. It's because they were working in silos. So they're only thinking about changing energy use. They're only thinking about how they can put in hydrogen, how they can put in new nuclear to solve their sector problem. And then also not considering that water is finite. They think it's in abundance and they can use whatever they want, and they just need to get an abstraction license and get it all signed off and it'll be fine. So for me, there needs to be a change in terms of the prioritisation and how water is regulated as what they can and can't do. Mm-hmm. So if an area is regularly in drought and actually there's no water available, there should be things there that is either that industry cannot be there or it has to have a closed system. So there's other benefits that are coming out. And it has to be driven by policy and regulation to force that change to happen. Because I think, as an industry where we're too busy thinking about the project, we're not thinking about the asset and the network around it. And therefore, we think of a very closed solution. And closed as in that wider thinking. And I think that's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think hydrogen gets a bit of a bad rap in terms of the water intensity, because so the most water intensive form of hydrogen is green hydrogen. So depending on how you make it, it's between 2 liters to 9 liters per cubic meter of hydrogen, and a cubic meter is equivalent to something like 33 kilohertz or something, So it's way less water intensive than traditional energy generation. So it's more, I think we have to worry about things like nuclear. And hydrogen also tends to be done in relatively small quantities. So I'm working with a mining client now to see how we can use mine impacted water to make hydrogen, which is a form of water that otherwise would have gone to waste, right? It would have just been discharged into the environment, or would have just kind of hung out in pockets and beds and trying not to pollute anything. So what are some alternative sources of water that can be used for hydrogen would be really interesting. And then for conventional energy generation, I think to your point, it's thinking about in the system, what is the hierarchy of water use, and also where can we offset some of that water use? So agriculture uses 70% of the world's fresh water, but there's been great innovations in agriculture. Like there's agriculture in the Middle East that is vertical farming that uses 90-95% less water than traditional agriculture. In the UK even, so Southern Water gives incentives to, and Severn Trent I think as well, gives incentives to farmers to do no-till agriculture, because then you don't have to irrigate, because the soil structure builds up over years and it's more spongy and can hold more water in the soil profile. It becomes green water. You don't have to use blue water. So then you don't have to abstract for that. So how do you think about the hierarchy of needs of water in an area, and how can you start to shift the system so that some of that abstracted water could go to things where you can't replace it? So how can you change the way we do agriculture so we don't have to irrigate? Okay, now we have that water available. We can use it for potable water, for cooling, for X, Y, and Z.
I like that idea of hierarchy of water use. It's a bit like the land use framework that's just come out, isn't it? It's, surely they could piggyback from that onto that. Erin, anything else on this?
I don't think I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of probe a bit more on data centres and AI. There seemed to be quite a lot of interest in the room on that particular one. And obviously now data centres are critical national infrastructure. I think we all kind of hope that, further developments and further progress in data and AI and Gen AI will help us solve the problem. So everybody wants to see it develop. But as Sarah mentioned earlier, I mean, one of the new AI growth zones is in a water scarce area. There's seriously been no consideration of the availability of water for where to put these centres. So we seem quite a long way away from where we need to be. Nobody is against having them, but there doesn't seem to be the join up, going back to your original point, Kat, about where to place them and what kind of water to use. So what can we do about this? I mean, how can we plan better? How can we get those messages to land more? Because it seems quite obvious, doesn't it? Like not to build them in water scarce areas when they could be sited anywhere. Right? It's kind of hard to explain why you would choose to do that.
Yeah, I think it's about connecting the dots, but where does the responsibility sit? A lot of these problems, when you break them down, they are fairly simple, and the regulations don't make sense in many contexts, but everyone's incentivized slightly differently or looking to make money, or and there's so many linked issues as well. Overconsumption being one, and if we were more conscious buyers, then we wouldn't there wouldn't be so much fast fashion, for example, and that industry uses a lot of water. And so I just think there's these gaps and things falling through the net that seem obvious, but whose responsibility is it? And it's worrying, Sarah's, about the government thinking about water in a particular way. Someone needs to, or not someone, but we all need to be lobbying. We need to shout about these issues, but we also need to act in a way that we prioritize it in our own lives. And I think the messaging and, we've talked about the value of water. Society's been on that journey, although the Trump America is kind of backtracking on a lot of it, but we've been on that journey with carbon, and we understand, it's taken decades, but we've got to a place where, we need to do something. We need to act collectively. but how do we make the same noise? Like, is it getting celebrities involved? Is it, you don't want it to have to get to where there's a big disaster that then forces you. But I worry that, does it have to get to the point where there is no water, or where, you can't afford water, or there are wars that break out, and I know in some regions there are, but, we shouldn't be getting to that state. We've got,
I think there's an element of why are we not questioning the why of the need? And it's having unintended consequences. So, yes, data centers have a purpose, but actually, what is that feeding? It's feeding our social media. It's feeding our habits in terms of which is a want and a nice to have rather than an essential. Now, water is an essential, and we're not actually thinking about it in terms of, what are our human needs compared to what's our human wants. And I do think if you look at it in terms of that change of perspective, you could be able to challenge, do we need so many of these different things? What is the purpose of having it? Great to have AI to help solve problems. Great to have data centers to, be able to store and, use data for informed purposes. But do we need so much? Do we need so much in terms of energy generation if we use less? It is actually feeding the wrong perspective.
Sorry, Sarah, and then
So I was just going to do a call out for, most people hopefully in this room know, but I do think we do have an opportunity. On the 27th of February, so next Thursday, the government will be launching its call for evidence for the independent commission, which has been led by Sir John Cunliffe. And they're asking the right questions. They're asking these questions. What do we need to do as a country to ensure that we can support the economic growth that we want whilst not running out of water or wastewater services? So I think that there is a real opportunity, probably back to your point, Erin, a once in a lifetime opportunity to feed in. Actually, these things are broken. And actually, a lot of what we've spoken about today in terms of the way in which water resources are planned for, the way in which infrastructure investment is planned for, the way in which water companies are incentivised, the way in which the media leads the debate rather than the scientists and the engineers and the people who understand how to deliver clean, safe drinking water. So I think there is an opportunity. I have heard the call for evidence is currently a draft at 204 pages, so you might need to block out some time in your calendars. I think it is an opportunity for change.
Just a month or so. Yes.
Yeah, I think it also is a bit about aligning the narrative that the government is trying to bring with the actual needs. So if the driver is growth, you say, okay, you want growth, you need data centers. And to some extent, we do need new data centers, even for net zero. So the digitalized grid is going to enable the ability for us to much better manage demand and supply so that we can incorporate more variable renewables, right? We don't have a base load of power as much anymore. So we do need more of that digitalized grid and the digitalization to help enable the energy transition in general. So we need this. You want to drive growth. Okay, where can you drive sustainable growth, right? Not in Cambridge. Does Cambridge need the growth? I think they're okay, right? Cambridge is doing fine. They're not sort of like infamous for being a bit like poor off and we need more jobs in Cambridge. Where do we need more jobs? Oh, Scotland. Scotland has a lot of water and it's cold. So data centers would be great in Scotland, right? So let's drive regional growth, build data centers in Scotland, right? So how can we also align the narrative a bit to help with their priorities so we speak their language as well? And in that way, embed the agenda in something they're already doing.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'll ask one more question and then we'll have the last 10 minutes for questions from the floor. So I just wanted to go back. We have touched on the kind of the consumer, but we haven't really delved into it too much. And I think fundamentally, we're not going to be able to deliver net zero, are we, without customers changing the way that we all live, really, whether it's switching vehicles or getting a heat pump or just being less wasteful with resources. But it's really thorny, isn't it, to try and make people change their behaviours. So, what can we do in terms of awareness, incentivization to try and bring people along the journey and maybe touch on, the kind of social justice element as well of not leaving anyone behind? Sorry, that's quite a big question.
But I'll just comment. We've covered a bit in terms of sort of frontline household customers. I'll just answer briefly from a business customer perspective, and I think there are things that we can do. So I feel like I've been a bit miserable in this discussion in what's going wrong, but there are some really important things that can be done at a sectoral level, and I think there are moves from a number of water companies and hopefully from Ofwat to move away from the complete illogic that we have today, which is bulk tariffs. So if you're a very large industrial user, your water actually gets cheaper the more you use. So back to the, what are the incentives? Well, there is zero incentive if I'm a very large user and my water is about 100th of my utilities bill, and it actually gets cheaper the more I use. And I think there is work underway which will move away from those bulk tariffs. The sort of what you actually need to do is flip that on its head and say, actually, you need to pay more the more you use. And that, for me, is how you start to unlock some of that business consumption. Is that, and that's not particularly popular if you're talking to businesses. If you were large industrial users, and I see we've got some retailers in the room, some of your customers won't like that. But going back to social justice, actually, if water is a tiny part of your outgoings and you have no incentive to use less, then you will never make that change. So I think we do need to be joined up with business users. We need to be looking at unlocking the potential of greywater reuse, rainwater harvesting. Somebody mentioned football clubs earlier. Plymouth Argyle used our market improvement fund to get some funding to effectively take a big underground sewage tank that was being disused. It was basically just plumbing. They replumbed it to take rainwater, and then during periods of drought, they used that rainwater to irrigate their pitches. Bleeding obvious thing to do. There is no way of funding that in a way that makes sense for a football club without that seed funding that came through our improvement fund. So it's about making sure the money's in the right place and you're incentivising businesses to use the right water at the right time.
And I think we are seeing some of those changes, aren't we, coming through in the tariffs?
We are, but it's really complicated.
Yeah. Maybe some of the retailers might want to say something.
But that's wholesalers. There are 570 different tariff combinations currently for a customer in the business market.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else on customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah's right. I think the dial is going to be made with business customers, and that needs to be the focus first. I mean, not only because of the trust issues with household customers, but also just because they're the big users of water, but also they influence the behavior of their employees. So if you see in your place of work, turn off the tap, or, we use low flow toilets, then you get interested in it and you're like, what is this? How can I use it in my work, in my life? Whereas if you have, your water company telling you, you are less inclined to do that. So I think the focus needs to be on businesses and on large users of water, industrial users of water, to change their behavior, because that's going to move the dial in a bigger chunk than trying to get all household customers. And not all household customers have the ability to do it anyway, because they may be vulnerable. They may need water for medical purposes. So it's difficult to put the onus. I think too much with the energy transition, the onus is being put on households and individuals, when actually industrial clusters, large industrial users, large businesses are actually the drivers more of energy use than individual households.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say that there's probably some learnings from the sort of building sector. I think that can be taken as to what works and what doesn't, because there is, from an energy reduction, renewables, from a residential perspective, there's grants in terms of how you can, upgrade your home, and actually from a lower income, you get lots of things available to you for free. As you go up that scale, it becomes more challenging. So it's based on income, which I think is a challenging factor. The other part of it is it's quite confusing, because depending on which area you go to, which organisation, they all have different rules. So with some, you can get support, great, doesn't matter, it doesn't even count on income. But if you put something like solar panels in, your opportunity for everything else drops. So there's lots of learnings in terms of what doesn't quite work, which actually I think the water sector can learn from. The other part of it is everybody gets charged the same. So there's no incentive to have an energy efficient house that uses less energy, like water. So I think if you switch the balance and think, well, actually, what works in something which is a bit more established, what doesn't work, and how we can do something different for the water sector, I think there'll be some quick learns that can be transferred over as to what not to do.
Okay, that's positive. Erin,
I was just going to say, I think most water companies have done their own, outreach and community engagement and trying to reduce demand or at least impact, behavioural change in this space. And all might have their own learnings, but we don't really understand what works in terms of reducing demand and what doesn't. And they're all regional monopolies and so all doing their own things. They might talk and share, but it needs to be national, if not international. It's not just a regional problem. And so I think there needs to be that coordination. Things like the Off-Water Innovation Fund, can provide money for that sort of thing. We will see what comes out of sort of the next rounds in terms of that.
Great. Okay.
The MOSL Innovation Fund is great for that kind of stuff with the Plymouth Argyle, and we submitted one with a water company last year for education in schools. That's a great initiative.
Okay, 10 minutes left. Open to the floor. Jane.
Hello, Jane Bellard from We're the Agency. Thank you, first of all. That's been really, really interesting. And actually, we specialise in behaviour change campaigns that are specifically about water saving. And this is making me think, actually, maybe we need to start in terms of the actions we're asking people to change. Maybe it's about starting to say, like, you need to purge your old emails and you need to, could you commit to doing fewer AI searches as a water saving tip, essentially? And actually, it's really got my mind thinking. But I'm wondering then, should the water industry be funding potentially alternative sources of cooling for data centers? Is that something where we should be going, okay, to your point earlier about innovation, should we be going, hang on a minute, this is a huge water problem and other people aren't interested in, it seems like we're the only people who care about the fact that water's being used to do this. Should we be looking at those kind of innovations as ways to save water in future?
Yeah, I think maybe it's a broader point, but linked to what you're saying is we find in the water industry there's a lot less in terms of the number of innovators or number of investors in innovation in the water sector compared to energy, as an example. And it's because there isn't the demand from the water companies. The water companies aren't, saying what they want. And when the innovators meet the need that they say they have, they don't have the mechanisms to support that and then put the money into it. And I think this is something where, if there is a need and if there is enough, support behind it and they make noise and there's money behind it, I think great. Yeah, that should be something that the water industry can influence, whether or not it directly invests. But we need the call from the water industry for that innovation and a clear funding route if we're going to get more investment in innovation from outside the sector, because it influences so many other sectors, as we've heard tonight. So yeah, I think there's a bit around, we need to be clear on what's needed. And if that's alternatives to, these AI data centers, ways of cooling them, yeah, but at the minute there's that disconnect, which is really frustrating.
And it's really important to note that there are alternative technologies. So we were talking to a data center company recently who operate in 30 different countries across the world, and there are only 2 that allow them to use potable water, and we're one of them. So in the majority of countries, even countries that are less water challenged than we do, you simply are not allowed to connect a data center to a potable water system. You have to use recycled water or air-cooled.
And the onus also has to be on the data center companies to come up with innovations of using less water in their own processes. It shouldn't be down to the water companies to do that. And many of them are. So, Microsoft, Meta, for example, all commit to being water positive, whatever that means. And so it is on their agenda, and the onus needs to be on them and the focus needs to be on them to be more water efficient as well.
Thank you very much. Good answers. Yeah. So there's one at the front here.
I'm Julia Stitchling, one of the WUN advocates. And my question is, we were talking before around the silo thinking and getting the water industry to collaborate more. But I'm wondering, are we maybe even then still thinking too small? Because if we are talking, different countries have obviously different regulations, but have also already implemented different technologies. Shouldn't we be thinking on a even bigger level of this is what's happening outside of the UK?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so we're currently looking at doing a bit of a mapping exercise of like regulations across the world, because we recently we're looking at the industry's interested in like no dig, partly from a net zero perspective, so solutions where you don't have to dig into the ground to fix your pipes and things. And sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here.
You're mapping regulations.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, we're aware in America, for example, that, it was Las Vegas Water have used the technology and it works for the past 8 years, and it's not innovative. It's not innovation, but to the UK it is. But we're like, this works and it passes all the regulations in America. What is it? Why can we not get it, here? And there's a bit of, so we're looking at, can we map some of the regulations and call out where the similarities or dissimilarities, is that word, are, so that we can begin that conversation, and at least it's not just shot down at, it doesn't meet Reg 31, or, and say, well, it doesn't meet this element. But if we can fix that, can we speed up the process, or can we have some form of even European standard, or, a global standard would be great, and not just for potable and not none. Yeah, so I think there's a lot more, but it's a great, we should be thinking definitely bigger.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the UK is actually a bit unique in that we don't look outside as much as other countries do. I think it's because we're the only fully privatized water industry in the world. So it's like, obviously, we're the most innovative, we're the best. And we probably were at one point, and now other parts of the world may have caught up or surpassed. And other parts of the world look to the UK. So I get calls from my colleagues all over the world asking, what is the UK doing about this? What's the UK doing about this? I was in Riyadh last week talking to a water production company, and they all wanted to know, what's the UK doing? What's the UK doing? Going to another country next week, all they want to know is, what's the UK doing? When we helped Irish Water set up, what's the UK doing? But now the UK needs to be asking, what's the rest of the world doing? Because looking up examples of, where machine learning, AI, Gen AI have been successfully deployed in water production, all of the examples are outside of the UK. There's semi-autonomous water treatment works in Korea with software that can be exported. In the Philippines, even, they're using machine learning for energy efficiency and for health and safety. So these are things that's not beyond the wit of man, as one of my clients would say. And the UK could benefit from looking more globally and understanding how maybe it's a smaller company, maybe they're not privatized, but they've done something innovative and we can learn from it.
And I guess like the Middle East as an example, where they're much more water scarce, and they don't have the same legacy issues that we might have of pipes that are so old, but they have more of a clean slate to build something. Like, if you were to start from scratch, what would you do? And they're thinking in that way, and I think we can learn from that. We obviously will have to adapt it for ourselves, but we should be working in partnership. And they also have money, to throw at it, and also looking to industry for solutions, because we find innovators go to industry first because they have the money to trial things and to do things before the water industry does. So let's have those quick learnings. What did they do? What did they learn?
Excellent. Okay, so we are pretty much out of time. I think we've had lots of strong messages here: break down the silos, more collaboration, more learning, cross-sector, cross-government, cross-country. Lots of
easy,
lots of that sort of thing. So it's been a great debate. I'd just like to ask you to join me in thanking our panel.